Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from 4 group. We are going to present about developing cross-cultural communication skill, written by Brian Hearn and Barry Tamelin. Okay, my name is Safifa Zahra Nuraziza. The first is to achieve effective communications across cultures, we need to consider 3 aspects. The first is language. Language is a word we can use to communicate. And the second is medium. The medium by which we communicate oral, written, oral, and electronic. And the example of written communications is like a report, and the example of the oral communications is presentations, and the example of electronic communications is using the technology for doing the communications with the others, like mobile phone, email, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. And the third is behavior. Behavior is the way we can use language to convey formality and informality, power and status, and how we get things done. The example is speaking skill. Not only that, but it also includes non-verbal communications. The next point, communications is much easier if we all speak in the same language or have equal fluency in lingua franca. If we all speak in the same language or have equal fluency in lingua franca, it can be established as a report, shows openness to the cultures, and increases our own self-esteem, confidence, and self-reliance. And it leads to better understanding, demonstrate commitment at a time, and gives the speaker a competitive edge. English is becoming widely accepted as the world lingua franca. The next is speed. Every language has a different speed and different degrees of inflections. For example, many people say the Indians' national language are spoken at speed, and that is a fact, the speed of delivery of Indian when speaking English. While in Europe, Spanish is generally accepted as the fastest language. The problem here is of non-understanding. I simply can't follow you. Slow down. Another important feature is stress. The stress in a word or sentence is where you place the most important emphasis. The issue is whether the stress carries meaning. For example, in English, we tend to stress the most important word in the sentence, while in both French and Hindi, people tend to stress at the end of the sentence. The next is intonations and volume. Intonations describe how the voice rises and falls in the sentence. We tend to associate strong intonations with heightened emotion. In the same way, a loud voice tends to be associated with dominance and arrogance, both personally and nationally. For example, if you want to ask someone, you can use rising intonations in the end of the sentence, like, "Are you happy?" But if you want to give a statement to the others, you can use falling intonations in the end of the sentence, like, "I feel sad." Silence and timing. Sitting silently to reflect on what have been said and to consider one's responses is particularly important for the Japanese, who say nothing but who are inwardly uncomfortable with the instant response adopted by many Western nationalities. Alongside silence is timing. Linguists talk of conversational overlap. Conversational overlap, which describe the practice of interrupting or overlapping with another speaker before she or he has finished speaking. In countries like Japan, where strict turn-taking in conversations is observed, conversation overlap may be seen as very impolite. The next is accent. Accent can be a major source of misunderstanding. This is difficult to resolve, although much work has been done in Indian call and contact centers on accent naturalizations to make Indian accent more understandable to the overseas client they are dealing with on the telephone. As a general rule, it is of course important, whatever your accent, to slow down and articulate clearly.
The next is false friend. A further problem which influences language is the actual words we use. This includes false friends, the transposing of the word from one language to another, sometimes with embarrassing results. For example, the word air in Bahasa means water, but in English, air means udara. It's the same spelling but have the different meaning. The next is bad language. Other areas of misunderstanding include swearing and the use of insults. In many countries, particularly those with a strong religious sensitivity, swearing is the strongly frowned upon, whereas in other cultures, it may be seen as the use of emphatic language. We are often insensitive to the shock value of a particular swear word we use in our mother tongue. If you are a user of colorful language, be especially careful. The next is we are talking about written communication. Written communication is one aspect of medium. The style of written communication is affected by degrees of formality and informality. Written communication in the UK, the USA, and indeed much of Western world is brevity and efficiency driven. In addition, there is now a tendency for courteous greetings and sign-offs to be less frequently used. The example. A typical email communication might be as follows. Brian, I'm completing chapter 5, is back in 1 hour. Barry. A more courteous and expensive form of communication might be more acceptable in Latin and Asian countries. So the communication to these cultures might be read as follows. Dear Brian, hope everything is going okay. This is just to let you know that I'm just completing chapter 5 and will email it to you in about an hour. Barry. The second communication does exactly the same job as the first, but is more personal and more courteous, although it takes longer to write and to read. Other cultures and different companies have different conventions, so it is important to learn about these and to observe them. The next is electronic communication. Electronic communication is the second aspect of medium. Electronic communication includes written communication, email, voice communication, and Skype, as well as the new social media communication methods. The latter are introducing the ways of expressing oneself, especially in Twitter. 140 characters message and using new forms of language such as texting or acronyms or initials, such as LOL, lots of love or laugh out loud. Since English still dominates the international media, most testing is done in English. As communication channels, in particular those that are electronically based, are constantly changing. We need to keep up to date regarding the technological advances in computers, email, mobile phones, video conferencing, and so on. The next is presentation. Presentation is the third aspect of medium. By definition, a presentation to a multicultural audience means dealing with local cultural expectation, avoiding embarrassment of offense being caused, and otherwise being disrespectful. It is important to discover in advance the expectation of the audience and the presentation style to which they are accustomed. Such preparation is essential in order to ensure success. When presenting in English, it is essential to keep sentences shorter, to speak clearly and slightly more slowly than with an all-native English-speaking audience, avoiding jargon and explaining any acronyms and initials. A common problem when using PowerPoint in presentation is the use of excessive detail. As a general rule, Western presenters advocate a maximum of 7-line slides with considerable white space and bold illustrative graphic. Many Asian presenters tend to fill their slides with a great deal of information and point to the parts they wish to emphasize. When presenting to multicultural audience, it is important to structure carefully your address. Tomlin offers the three approaches to structuring a presentation. The first is signposting, the second is signaling, and the third is summarizing. Signposting. The first, signposting states what the main theme of the presentation is going to be. The second is indicates how long the presentation will last. The third, say what your main points will be. The fourth, say when you will take questions anytime or at the end. If you imagine a presentation as a journey, the signposting stage will give the audience a roadmap. So, they will know what is going to happen and how long the journey will last.
The next is signaling. There are 3 important points of signaling. The first, indicate to the audience when you begin your first point. The second, summarize when you have completed. And the last, signal when you are about to begin the next point. After signaling, there are summarizing. When you reach the end of your last point, briefly summarize all the key points again. This allows your audience to remind themselves of the journey they have just undertaken and helps them identify any points they may have missed or of which they may not have fully appreciated the importance. At the end, reiterate the importance of the main theme. Finally, invite questions and remember to conclude by thanking the audience for its attention, thus indicating that the presentation has ended. The next slide is about listening skills. In this section, we examine the importance of both passive and active listening skills. Listening has been described as a process of self-denial. It is a vital skill in assisting us to decode the messages we receive. When we listen, we are usually paying attention to the message and we attempt to make sense of what we hear. The listening process involves 5 related activities. The first is receiving, the second is interpreting, and the third is remembering, the fourth is evaluating, and the fifth is responding. The first is receiving. What we hear is often blocked out by external noise, distraction, our lack of concentration, or lack of interest in the subject matter. The second is interpreting. The use of a different, unfamiliar frame of reference, values, concepts, attitudes, and bias might also impede our understanding. The third is remembering, the process of storing for future reference, taking notes, and summarizing. The fourth is evaluating, making a judgment regarding accuracy of facts, opinions, the quality of evidence, and reliability of data. The last is responding. This involves various types of feedback as a result of what is heard, which may include verbal response, laughter, silence, applause, and nonverbal responses such as nodding or shaking the head, frowning, and smiling. The next slide is about the barriers to effective listening. The barriers to effective listening can include the following. The first, prejudgment, which involves jumping to conclusions and allowing prejudice and preconceived ideas to dominate. The second, trying to take control of the conversation by jumping in with interruptions. The third, listening selectively, concentrating only on what we want to hear and agree with. The fourth, competitive listening occurs when we are listening for what we do not agree with and we interrupt to correct, modify, or criticize what the speaker is saying. Often described as judgmental listening, competitive listening is probably the most common type for professional people from all walks of life. But it can at times be seen as too aggressive and attempting to dominate. The fifth point, reaction to emotive words such as rest and stereotypes. 6. Interrupting, a tendency to overtalk caused by our desire to put across our views. 7. Attempting to take detailed notes and trying to establish what are the key points, a common mistake made by students. 8. Daydreaming, letting our attention wander to other more important or more interesting concerns. 9. Judging the actual delivery rather than the content by concentrating on mannerism, dress, and accent. 10. The delivery of the speaker, too fast, too complex, too long-winded, patronizing tone, poor preparation, and unclear diction. 11. Physical discomfort caused by the location, conditions which are too hot, too cold, too stuffy, or subject to too much external noise. Next, active listening is a training technique devised in 1977 by Thomas Garden. It describes a way of focusing on the speaker so that the listener absorbs not only the meaning that the speaker wants to communicate, but also the meaning behind the meaning, that is, emotions and feelings. As a listening technique, it comprises 3 stages. The first, repeating. Second, paraphrasing. And the last is reflecting. The first stage is repeating. In the repeating stage, we listen and show interest. We may nod or make verbal signal to show we are listening. We pay attention and establish eye contact, and we may show we are listening by giving feedback using exactly the same words used by the speaker. Above all, we try not to interrupt the speaker's train of thought. The next stage is paraphrasing. When it comes to responding, we enter the paraphrase stage. This involves the same processes as repeating, but it is also important to give feedback by using similar phrases to the speaker. This shows that we have listened, have taken time to reflect, and have reformulated what the speaker has said in a way that he or she can agree with. The last stage is reflecting. The final stage occurs when we give feedback to the speaker using our own words and approach. Next, active listeners often complain about the strain of remaining silent while someone else talks. The speakers themselves often talk of the tension of speaking when the listener just concentrates and gives no response. There is therefore a need in networking to demonstrate active empathy. The way to do this is to use FACE, which stands for focus, acknowledge, clarify, and empathize. The first is focus. You need to focus on the speaker by maintaining good eye contact, whilst always remembering that in some cultures, strong eye contact may be seen as challenging. Next is acknowledge. Means using verbal or non-verbal cues to show you are listening. For example, nodding or say aha. Next is clarify. Means asking what happened next or repeating to the speaker what has been said. The last is empathize. Means showing appreciation or sympathy by using such phrases as read, that must have been difficult, or abstract. The next slide is about silence. What is immediately obvious about active listening is that it is a much more reflective, quieter, and calmer process. It allows us to observe how the speaker feels as well as the actual message. It allows time for us to reflect and to formulate in our turn a reasoned response which agrees common ground, but also allows us to state our own point of view. Silence is much more of a tradition in countries like Japan, China, and Finland. For many of the rest of us, the urge to jump in and interrupt is too strong as we are uncomfortable with periods of silence. The next topic is about networking. Networking is a very useful way of gaining information, researching a problem, and opinion making. It is often the key to successful business relationships, and the conversation around the water cooler, the formal banquet, and the coffee break are all networking opportunities to get to know people personally. Three qualities are essential to effective networking. The first, the ability to listen, which we have covered earlier in this chapter. The second, the ability to empathize. And the last is the ability to ask questions. The next slide is about the ability to ask questions. There are two skills involved when networking. The first, how to break the ice and how to avoid embarrassing subjects. Many political subjects may be taboo. For example, comments on human rights, pollution or change of government, all of which may be unwelcome as my questions about wives, partners, and families, which may be intrusive in some cultures but welcome in others, such as Latin cultures. Useful icebreakers could include asking people where they come from, what they did in their previous job, and whether they have traveled abroad much before. Such questions provide opportunities in a natural, non-threatening way to find out more about people without touching on any controversial topic and giving them the opportunity to speak about themselves.
The UNIC project. In 2008, the AU Uniting Europe Through Culture or UNIC project provided a formula for analyzing cultural differences. It identified 5 steps for dealing with cultural communication misunderstanding and behavioral differences by analyzing cultural experience. 1. Know your own culture. Understand what happens in your own culture. This can often happen only by confronting step 2. 2. Identify difference. Examine what is different in the foreign culture from the expected communication style or behave in your own culture. 3. Empathize. Attempt to understand why people in the foreign culture communication or behave in different ways from what you expect. Try to ascertain what expectation and values this signify. Nonverbal communication or NVC. We speak with our vocal organs, but we converse with our whole body. Abercrombie, 1970. Albert Mehrabian, the Emeritus Professor of Linguistics at UCLA, has studied the communication of American high school students. From his studies, he concluded the following points. Mehrabian, 1981. Words account for 7% of a message as far as feelings and attitudes are concerned. NVC or body language account for 38% of a message as far as feelings and attitudes are concerned. Facial expression account for 55% of a message. In other words, the actual words we use are less important than the way in which we say things and our body language. NVC can be divided up as follows. More examples of gesture and how they differ in their meaning as follows. No step. In the UK, this implies secrecy, confidentially, keeping it dark. In Italy, it means a friendly warning, take care. In the Middle East, al-hasmi, literally, on my nose, means I will do the favor you ask. Had not. In Bulgaria and parts of Greece, this means no. In some states in southern India, it means simply I'm listening, whereas in most other countries, it means yes. In Japan, smiling and nodding imply understanding but not necessarily agreement. Okay sign. This must be used with caution. In many parts of Latin America, it is a sign of insult. In parts of southern France, people will consider it means zero, that something is worthless. In Japan, the thumb and forefinger are used for money, the finger creating the round outlet of a coin. In some Arab countries, it can mean a curse. Facial expressions are the ones that we can best control, and this can be deliberately false. The face is the most important source of nonverbal signaling. It is highly expressive and can send much information. The use and meaning of eye contact, for example, looking at people directly while you are speaking to them or not, varies between cultures. Eye movements can give powerful messages which include showing interest, boredom, or disbelief. In many cultures, makeup accentuates the impact of the eyes. Postures involves a number of potential pitfalls. How you stand can often have an influence on how you are perceived abroad. Appearance, or what we wear. It is often said that clothes make up the man. Clothes can signal a person's sense of self-esteem, status, group membership, socio-economic class, and general character. Haptics describe the amount of touching people do when they communicate. A knowledge of the accepted norms of behavior in certain cultures is extremely important. How, when, and where we touch others is sometimes the most misunderstood aspect of NVC. Best practice for successful cross-cultural communication. The following are suggested examples of best practice when faced with the potential problems we have discussed so far. Suspend your judgments of the other culture despite your prejudice and stereotypical image. Try to keep an open mind. Develop your listening skills, both active and passive, and the appropriate reaction while attempting to understand the differences in the other culture. Prepare in advance by learning about the other culture with which you will be communicating.